Hello, welcome everyone to our webinar, Pathways of Origin Models to Declare Your Merchandise. My name is Aline Araújo. I'm Analytics of the Federal Confederation of Industry, and I'll be very happy to be mediating this conversation. Before we start, I'd like to remind you that we are doing this webinar in Spanish, in Portuguese, and English. For you to choose the link for your choice of language, just click on the link down below. And lastly, we would really want to hear from you. If you have any questions, please just go to our chat box, and at the end of the presentation, we will be directing these questions to our guests, and then he'll answer us. Okay? Thank you very much. So let's get started with our webinar. I would like to introduce our Superintendent of International Relations of the Federal Confederation of Industry, Federico Lamero, and he'll start off with some initial remarks. Please, Federico. Thank you, Aline. Well done on this initiative. I just wanted to, first of all, welcome everyone. I would like to just say to every participant here, welcome. First of all, I would like to just thank especially our speakers. He accepted the invitation of being here present with us. I would like to thank Dr. Sir Martin van der Velde. He is president of the International Council of Certificate of Origin of the International Chambers of Commerce. Welcome. Analia Correia. She's from Department of Agreements and Negotiations of the Latin American Association of Integration, ALADI. Analia, thank you so much for being here. Rafael Lorenzina, he's a colleague, he's the General Coordinator of Origin Regimes of the Ministry of Development, Industry, Commerce, and Services, and we call here in Brazil MDIC. Rafael, thank you so much. And Thales, General Coordinator of Regimes of Origins, also of the Ministry of Development, Industry, Commerce, and Service. Thales, thank you very much. And I would like to thank as well, first, to the Federations of Industry, the several representatives that are here participating with us, participants of Congeniality of National Confederation of Latin America, all of the businessmen here and women. I know that we have some members here of the International Council of the Certificates of Origin of International Chambers of Commerce. And I would like to thank everyone else, all of specialists, for your participation here. So first, I'd like to say that it's an honor to be here with you to discuss such a valuable theme, which is the entire discussion that we are going to be doing regards the certification of origin. And first, we like to have a reflection to everyone that's here, which is to try to understand that throughout this short webinar that we're going to have today, how you can take advantage of the many of the different reactions of this model of self-certification and issuance of certificates of origin by authorized entities. This is a key theme for today, and I think we need to discuss more and more because of the commercial agenda that Brazil has pushing forward. Is still uncertain on one side, but today as an agenda, we have several negotiations and commercial agreements like Mercosur with the European Union. We have agreements of Mercosur with EFTA, Canada. We also heard that the next month we'll be starting negotiations with agreement with Mercosur and the United Emirates. And the proof of origin is also always going to be a crucial item in this discussion. It's important to highlight that even inside Mercosur, there was a huge transformation since we've been doing some alignment to the international practices, trying to find efficiency and simplicity in this model. The inclusive and a hybrid model for the proof of origin is one of these innovations, giving companies the freedom of choosing by a method of proof that best fits their needs. In reality, the hybrid model established a coexistence of the two models of proof of origin to be recognized by the countries that are member of this international agreement. We have self-certification by the companies and also issuance of certificate by the government or by entities authorized by the government of the exporting country. I think all of us know this context, geopolitical context that we are in today. There a dynamic of free commerce we are in constant evolution. And of course, we need to be aligned with these trends, with the right regulation. I was just talking with Aline, my colleague, even about the possible impacts of CBAM and other rules that might come from the European Union or maybe from the United States in the future. Maybe it can even take us to rethink or maybe go deeper in these models of self-certification of proof of origin. And what we want at the end of the day is more competitiveness to the exporter. In the international scenario, we want to make sure that commerce is easy. We want to gain new markets. We understand that there is a valuable role in brand positioning and, of course, credibility of the company. And that is why we understand that this theme is so important. So our idea for today is that our international speakers, our national speakers, they will be talking about some of the benefits and challenges of this hybrid model of proof of origin. And we want from this moment of sharing information, we really find a network of cooperation among everyone that's here today. And we want to consider that this is one of the many forums that we have to create dialogue, to answer questions, to understand some of the challenges. And what we want at the end of the day is transparency in commerce, and we definitely want to create a relationship that's favorable for companies, for the government, for the society. I hope this webinar is full of learnings and growth for everyone. I want to thank once more everyone that's present here, and I wish you a wonderful webinar. Thank you very much, Federico. Thank you for your initial remarks. I think they are very encouraging, and this is a good place for us to start a debate. First, to go deeper in this theme, I'd like to invite now Varty van der Weijt. He's the president of the International Council of Certificate of Origin, that will be bringing us more and more information. He is the chair of the International CEO Council, Chamber of Commerce. Martin, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this interesting webinar. My name is Martin van der Weijden. I'm working now almost 25 years in the field of origin. Indeed, I'm the chair of the CO Council, the Certificate of Origin Council of ICC in Paris. But my normal day job is working in the field of origin at the Netherlands Chamber of Commerce, where we issue both non-preferential and preferential documents every day. We issue about 700,000 documents each year. And my experience to start with, when I started 25 years ago, if I compare it with today, the complexity of origin has risen. It's way more complex than it was 25 years ago. So take that in mind. I will share my screen, and I will give you some of my insights at the Netherlands, especially at the Netherlands Chamber, about preferential proof of origin. What I will touch base on today is the different options. They were mentioned already: certificate of origin, self-certification. But also I like to focus a bit, what is the best solution? And I will focus on some elements, some projects that we are doing at the level of ICC to help our international traders. In the old days, I think there are three different ways to declare origin. One is the official certificate of origin issued by customs, an authorized body, chambers of commerce, Ministry of Trade, depending in which kind of country you are located. but there is an official body, an official organization issuing a certificate of origin. Of course, this option only can be used when it's mentioned in the free trade agreement. I put some examples there from the European Union perspective, the Euro 1 document, the EURMET document, or the Form A document, all examples of preferential certificates of origin. The second well-known option is self-certification. We call it often an invoice declaration because most of the time the standard text where we declare that the preferential origin is, for example, European Union, the most common place to put that text is the invoice. But it's not limited to the invoice. You can place it on a packing list or other trade documents. The difference with the normal certificate of origin, there is no involvement of an authorized body with every single shipment. And also this option, of course, can only be used when it's mentioned in the free trade agreement. A relative new one, importer's knowledge. It's popping up now in a couple of free trade agreements where importer's knowledge is also an option to declare preferential origin. Today, I will not focus on importer's knowledge. My personal opinion is importer's knowledge only will work when the exporter and the importer belongs to the same group of companies. Let's take a multinational who is located in Brazil and located in the European Union, and both the exporter and the importer do have the same access to the same information about the origin of the product. In that case, it will work. In a normal situation where the exporter is selling something to the importer, it's not working. The importer always needs the exporter to declare the preferential origin. So we will not focus on this one. My strong opinion, it only will work for a certain amount of companies. I already said I'm 24 years working in the field of origin. Looking back a bit from the old days, the official certificate of origin was always there, for example, in the area in Asia. If I look at the old free trade agreements in that area, there was only one single option. It was an official certificate of origin. The only option for self-certification, for example, in NAFTA in USA, even that it was not an invoice declaration, but it was a certificate of origin, it was issued by the exporter himself. That was only self-certification. And the hybrid system, where in a free trade agreement, the option for self-certification or an official certificate of origin was the one that I worked in the European Union up to 2015. So before 2015, it was all hybrid and there was an option to choose for an official certificate of origin or self-certification. What's the difficulty with the preferential certificate of origin? What do I hear? Why are we focusing on self-certification? The main objective that we hear over there, it might be difficult to obtain for an exporter an official certificate of origin. He needs to apply. Often it is still a paper process. He needs to go to an official organization. There must be a stamp, all these kinds of things. Time consuming, it can be quite difficult to obtain your document. More handling activities. I'm not even sure if that is true. If a certificate of origin, is it delivering more handling activities at the border compared to self-certification? I'm not sure. There's not a lot of data around. The benefit, if we do it right, that companies with a limited knowledge about origin, they can go to this organization who is issuing certificates of origin. That's what we do in the Netherlands. When someone is applying at the Netherlands Chamber, we are really checking origin before we are issuing the certificate of origin. And we help the exporter to avoid making mistakes because, again, origin is quite complex. On the other hand, if the official organization is not doing any checks on origin whatsoever, I see no value in an official certificate of origin, because what's the difference then with self-certification? If the authorized organization, if the authorized body is not checking the origin when the document is issued, go for self-certification. But the benefit is there when the organization is really checking the origin. Self-certification. Yeah, I'm looking from a European Union perspective. Before 2015, it was a hybrid system. After 2015, all the new free trade agreements of the European Union, it's only self-certification. There is no other option anymore. It's only self-certification. Normally, in the old days, there was a check from customs to use self-certification. In the free trade agreements, it's called an approved exporter status. So the exporter, he had the option between an official certificate of origin and self-certification. If it was an exporter that is having an export every week, not a difficult product origin-wise, he has the knowledge about rules of origin, he knows what he is doing. He could get a permit from customs in the Netherlands to be an approved exporter. And I think that's a big benefit. Why not? If an exporter really knows what he is doing, he can use self-certification, nothing against it. So customs will check at the beginning, but also normally after 2 or 3 years, customs will do a check again if everything is still in good order. What we see today in the European Union, and perhaps you are familiar with it, is the REC system. It's also self-certification, but it's no longer an approved exporter status. And what is happening now is that also an exporter who is having one shipment a year with no knowledge whatsoever about rules of origin can go to a website, can get a number, get a REX number, and can use self-certification. But he has no clue what he is doing. There are limited or almost no checks anymore. Everyone, if you have knowledge or no knowledge about rules of origin, you can get the REX number and you're in business. So there's the balance. What's the best option? What's the best solution? It's depending who we are asking. I'm in a lot of meetings with the World Customs Organization, World Trade Organization, UNCTAD, all organizations important on rules of origin. And it's really depending. Some are saying self-certification is the best option. Others are saying, no, please go for an official certificate of origin. To me, it's really up to the organization. And for me, there is no best solution whatsoever. Self-certification, if you are customs in the importing country, self-certification might be better. But the importer, he wants to make use of a preferential claim. He wants to pay less import duties. And on the other hand, he don't want to be at risk. If the exporter is making a mistake, the liability is there for the importer. Customs in the importing country, if the origin is not true and correct, they like to go to the importer so that the importer can pay the import duties. But if there is an official certificate of origin in between, it's way more difficult for customs in the importing country to go to the importer and say, your origin claim is wrong. Because the importer will say, how can you blame me? I have an official certificate of origin. If you want to blame someone, go to the organization who has issued the certificate of origin in the country of export. So from a customs perspective in the importing country, self-certification is way more easy to put a claim on the importer. The exporter, normally if the importer say, put this text on the invoice, he's willing to do that. He is not having a clue what he is doing with origin. Perhaps he has no problem to apply for a certificate of origin, but it has not to be a time-consuming procedure. It has to be easy to apply for a certificate of origin. Of course, with all digital systems, no problem at all. But also, if there is no certificate of origin anymore, and we see that in the European Union with the new free trade agreements, the small and medium enterprises with limited knowledge about origin, where can they go? They cannot go. They are more than welcome at the Netherlands Chamber, but they are not applying for a certificate of origin. So by themselves, they are not coming to me for a second opinion on rules of origin. So my strong opinion is there is no one size fits all. There is no solution where you can say self-certification is the best in all situations. Also not a solution that a certificate of origin is the best situation. There's nothing wrong with self-certification, but it's really depending on the role of the organization. What is your role in the process? The type of products. Is there any risk with it? Are the rules of origin? The type of exporter, does he have a lot of knowledge? And of course, the complexity of the rules of origin. And in my opinion, also, so the hybrid system might be the best. Give the option to the exporter that he can apply for an official certificate of origin if he does not have the knowledge about origin. And if he has the knowledge, go for self-certification. What we sometimes forget is that the free trade agreement is all about benefiting from the trade between the importer and the exporter. The rules of origin are just an instrument, nothing more and nothing less. But with 400 or 500 free trade agreements in the world, we made origin quite complex. It is very complex, even for a specialist as myself at the chamber. But from the beginning, the free trade agreement is there for trade to benefit from. And if a small and medium enterprise has difficulties with rules of origin, self-certification might not be the best option. What are we doing with this from the level of ICC? A couple of years ago, we put out a position paper where we also said this dual system, this hybrid system, that might be the best approach in free trade agreements. Please leave the choice to the organizations, to the companies, that if they have no knowledge, that they can apply. On the other hand, we see the rise for self-certification, especially from the side of customs. And what we are doing there, we are now working on a project called Genesis, where we give the option for exporters to go with self-certification with their invoice declaration to the Chamber of Commerce. We will check if the origin is true and correct. And with that, we are making sure that the exporter is making the correct statement and that the origin is true and correct. And we are lowering the liability for the importer. I think as chambers, we are in the best position with that. We have an incredible network, especially for the small and medium enterprises, and it's easy that they can go to the chamber. Here's a bit of a flow schedule how it's working, And we are now in the phase that we are working with 9 countries to start with, to help exporters with the complexity of preferential rules of origin. Because removing a certificate of origin is not removing the complexity. The complexity of rules of origin will stay there. And if you remove the last step and you make self-certification really simple, you're not removing the complexity in free trade agreements. It's still there. So that's an overview of what we have experienced in the past 24 years, my experience. And again, I think the hybrid system is the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. It's always a pleasure to hear you with all your experience, and I think that you brought us a very important view for every participant about this theme, especially in Brazil, which is the theme that we are starting discussing now. We still do not have self-certification implemented, but we see it in the horizon that this is coming closer and closer being a reality. And to continue bringing this discussion of the hybrid model of proof of origin, I would like to invite Analia Correa. She is technician of the Latin America, technical specialist from the Agreement and Negotiations Department. Analia, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Before anything else, I would like just to thank from the General Secretary Alexandre Gonis, the Chief of the Department, and negotiations of the General Secretary of ALADE. And it's a pleasure for me to be sharing this space with great people here. And Tali said it's always with us in some meetings. So let's start sharing the presentation for today. They asked us to talk about the proof of origin certification in Latin America. Can you see any full screen? The presentation, please. Not yet. I believe you have 2 screens. We see the control screen and not full screen.
Nevertheless, I would like to say that in 2021, the General Secretariat conducted study with 139 members with respect to the certification of origin. And for this, an analysis was conducted and that the agreements were signed by ALADE both in Latin America and the rest of the world. This was classified as a kind of certification that was done in each of these countries. Nevertheless, after 2022, we organized yet a General Secretariat, a workshop about self-certification of origin, and we saw that this was a trend between trade agreements, which would be interesting for member countries to come to know what were the experience, the advantages, disadvantages, and the challenges that the competent organizations could come to know and share with others. And throughout the presentation, I'm going to tell you about the conclusions of this workshop. The content of the presentation today is going to talk about the following points: the kind of certification of origin, analytical classification, and the kinds of self-certification, the certification of origin in the agreements by the ALADE countries, and with other Latin American countries as well, and the certification for third parties, which we know as certification of competent authorities, or in delegation of functions with enabled authorized entities, and the advantages and disadvantages of the self-certification, challenges, and some final considerations with the participants of the initiatives of this digital certification of origin that is being done at Aladi, which is implemented by several countries, among them Brazil. In relation to the general classification and the types of certifications of origin, we have agreements and also the authorized authorities. On the other hand, this other certification, depending on what is established in the rules of origin, can be done by the exporter and also among the imported as well. According to the instrument used, the certification of origin, it can be done through a certification of origin, and the certificate, it must be done by a third party. It is a certification that has two signatures from the importer and the employee of the authorized authorities, and the other is a declaration or a commercial document. In this case, we're talking about self-certification. The third category of analysis is the kind of document and signature which we use, which can be done with the signature of the employee of the exporting entity that can be share the images. You know that during the pandemic, some countries had restrictions regarding mobility. At Aladi, it was agreed that they would exchange or PDF image by a certification of origin for the customs, and for the time these restrictions lasted. We also have another way, which is the electronic format. The digital signature, depending on the country, it is the safest one. We call it the digital signature, the advanced electronic signature, and the qualified signature, as I mentioned. In this certification of origin from Aladi, which is a file and a stamped digital signature. Within the classification, we will concentrate on the analytical concentration of the self-certification system. And according to the studies 139, we analyze the origins of the customs, which is a document from June 2018. We have 4 topics for self-certification. This first one is the authorized export system. This will allow the self-certification only for the exporters that are approved by the competent authority because of the trust that they show, and that according to the accounting, we have all the customs authorities as authorized economic, qualified economic authorized, only for a few exporters that fulfill with a specific requirement and allow the self-certification. In second place, we're going to go ahead. It is a registered export system, the one that we use in European countries. What they do is that they register in a general register. We call it the RES register, including information with respect to the previous system. There is no need for an approval and assessment from the competent authority when they are registered, so they can self-certify themselves. So the third system in Latin America is the system based on the exporter. This means that the self-certificate by all the exporters without the need of register and not authorization. So, and lastly, this is based on the importer, which we have a few examples of agreements among the countries from ALADI that they have with the United States of America. But these agreements, they talk about the self-certification system is done this by the exporter or import. And as an example, we have the agreement done between Mexico and the United States, and all Chile, Colombia, Peru, Panama, which shows this mode. So I share what Martin said a few minutes ago, that the self-certification by the importer, it's more feasible for the countries of the same group, because we require that the importer has strong trust and the exporter will depend on him to prove the origin. So it is very difficult that it is used in other instances, or that the importer or exporter do not have the knowledge or a strong trust relationship between them. And finally, within the self-certification, two ways of doing it according to the support that we have and the certification of origin issued by the importer and exporter according to the system that is used, or the alternative of the invoice or a document house to identify the goods that we are talking about and the one that qualifies as original in a concrete and easy manner. Now, taking into account this analysis at ALADI, we had made 98 trade agreements with Latin American countries, and analyzing the types of certification, or of 91, they are done by third party or also by competent authorities. An example of country that certify according to the competent authority, we have Colombia, and also we have the international part as Bolivia as well, the National Service of Import, and countries also use the Chamber of Commerce and Industrial Confederations. For this, of these 91 agreements, we have 7 of them that is self-certified by the exporter in a certificate of origin with support. We have the Economic Implementation Agreement, which is number 1 between Chile and Mexico, which is called Agreement 66. This name given by ALADI is a complementary agreement for export. And we also have one between Bolivia and Mexico with signature from the importer only. And we have TLT between Chile and Panama, Chile with Central America, Colombia, and also with El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and with Mexico, Central America, and TLC from Panama, from Central America. Besides this, there are 4 agreements that self-certify based on the certification with invoicing, just for authorized exporters. What do I mean by this? The other exporters have to issue a certificate of origin. In this case, we have TLC Panama, Peru, Costa Rica, Peru, Honduras, and Peru, Guatemala. And lastly, in the region, we have example of a hybrid system, which in the Mercosur, with this new regime of origin, which is not put into practice yet, but this will very soon be put into practice. So in this case, we have this option. The importer can opt to self-certify using a declaration, an invoice, or commercial document, or through the competent authority, authorized authorities or entities. So this 18218 is a new ROM. As I showed you, it is not in force yet, but it will be the first example that we're going to have in the region of a system that is purely hybrid when the member countries establish this, because for them, it will be contemplated into the protocol so that they can be used by these countries, as the country must get into agreement and inform the other country that they will start using this kind of certification. So for them to know exactly how, so if it's going to arrive through an invoice, and it has to be signed by the approved entity. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the third-party certification, which we have much more experience in Latin America, and highlight a few points. I would like to just refer to what Martin has just said about the role of the certifying entity. What is the role that we expect from them? We sometimes forget this. Sometimes the role of the certifying authority must certify what the exporter declares is true and that the product is original. So you have to keep all the documentation that they have the moment they decide to issue and sign this certificate of origin to certify the truth of what is being stated. It has to then collaborate and say exactly and do exactly what Martin did. We talk about the role and the function of the certifying entity. We cannot limit ourselves only by signing the document like it works with the exporter. It doesn't have to be, it must be automatic to have the declaration of origin or the previous declaration, because the exporter then would say that the goods is original. They put a number of information there, but the entity, what should it do? Mainly in the beginning, when they don't know the exporter, or when they change the product as well, we must have the control and inspection, and the declaration must be checked as true. So then we can request more documents or additional information, and also check the product if necessary, so that we can check if the goods are original from that specific place, and they have installed capacity of the product so that they can continue with this production process. We can do the following up of production, the execution, we can check inventory, and also conduct a visit, and to see also that the product, if it is only an empty office and it have installed capacity, then it would be a important red flag, because the certificate cannot or must not be issued under these conditions. So if they cannot prove the installed capacity, at least at a specific moment, when we get to know the company, the role of the third party does not have any reason to happen. So there would be no significant difference between a self-certification and a third-party certification. So we would not have a concrete checking or verification. Now let's talk about another system, which is the self-certification. As mentioned, in 2022, we had this workshop at Alade, which was very interesting because the government or those responsible that are those entities are responsible for issuing the certification of origin. We wanted to hear their experiences and also questions with regard to self-certification. And as of this workshop, we created a number of advantages, disadvantages, and inclusions, and I'm going to share with you some of these points. Within the advantages of the self-certification, we have much more speed in the issuance of the certification compared with the bureaucracy or red tape of the government that needs a bigger amount of information, much more information to issue the certification of origin. They have to do a lot of coming and going with the exporter. So it's much more bureaucratic or red tape. With respect to the self-certification, it is much faster because the exporter declares the certification, declares the certification immediately to the importing country. So and then is also reduction of cost because there is no intervention of third party, because when this happens, the costs are higher. And the third aspect is the empowerment of the trade operators, because in the third party certification, many of the exporters, they think the third one will revise. So they do not put a lot of effort in issuing the certification because they're not going to have a lot of responsibility. It's only one control checkpoint before the product arrives at the order. In case of the self-certification, the responsibility will fall on to the exporter. They have to acknowledge that they are responsible, and in case of an inspection of origin that the importing company may begin doing so, and it also makes the trade much easier. The exchange among the countries and the signatures and also the stamps and the enabled employees to do so. So, and lastly, in the mode of the declaration of invoice, we can focus much more on the materials of origin, the quality or the origin of the goods, rather than the formal aspects and all the documents. So, the certification of origin sometimes at the border or customs, they concentrate more on the certification. If there is any mistake in this proof of origin, this makes the certification drop, so they cannot use the commercial agreement. So it costs a lot to uh, repair this. When we have the declaration in an invoice, for example, in an agreement that was negotiated with the European Union, which is still not signed and not enforced, but with a sentence, we declare that the good is of origin according to the regimen of agreement. And that's it. There is no possibility of having so many origins with this kind of declaration of origin. In a certification of origin, on the other hand, we have many commercial information, data. We have the invoice information that is included, the declaration from customs, the import declaration from customs. It is much easier to make mistakes, and many of the time, this sort of makes the certification invalid or drop. So in this case of self-certification and also the declaration in the invoice, it's much easier, costs are less, and this allows us to concentrate much more on the control and the quality of the origin of the goods and not so much on the formal aspects that we used to do in several of the certificates of origin. And on the other hand, we have the disadvantage of self-certification. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to this aspect. The advantages in this model, they are also in somewhat a disadvantage for the other third party. The speed of self-certification says also entails that if the exporter is not well prepared, it's going to commit more mistakes. There's going to be a higher risk of making this certificate invalid or non-valid. So, or when he doesn't know the rules of origins on side of the exporter, the rule of origin is a profession in C. The exporter must know about the nature of their business, which is to produce and sell. It's not to be specialist in the origin. So smaller and medium-sized companies, they have more difficulties or problems to have staff that are experts in rules of origin. So this is what happens frequently. They ask for advice and then they try doing it by themselves. They will then repeat the same format of the declaration, a certification done by a consultant, for example. We must take this into account. For example, when there is this kind of agreement, there is a possibility to do the self-certification. And we also have the eventual difficulty that the exporter can have when they face origin inspection because they might not have the necessary documents or for not knowing the procedure. During the inspection, we know there are strict rules, we have defined deadlines, and we must save or keep all this documentation to show what was declared is correct and true. And sometimes the exporters do not know these process and procedure and do not file all the information to back up an inspection operation. And in the third point here, the possibility is that when the self-certification system begins, because of mistakes that are committed, they can increase the denial of this kind of agreement. And then lastly, we have an increase in risk of the certification of origin by the non-participation of a third party as a guarantee. So this is both for exporters, for customs, and also for importing companies. Like in Latin America, we have a number of authorized entities with a lot of experience in certification, with technicians or personnel prepared for this, so that they confer trust, so that the customs can show that the certification is indeed original. And then when the customs cannot acknowledge this from the exporters, then they have to receive all the information that is necessary to accept the declaration. Now, we're going to talk about the challenges of the self-certification. First, it's to strengthen the training of exporters and importers with respect to the rules of origin. It's not only with respect to the certification. They have to know all the aspects of the network of origin, the qualification of origin. They have to know the criteria of origin that the product must fulfill before exporting it. And they have to know the aspect with regard to the control, inspection, verification process, and also the regimen of each agreement through which the importer has to do the operation. Another challenge is the tracking. So sometimes the importer is not the owner of the product that they export. So it's important to have information about the production process as well as the necessary documentation to answer to any inspection with respect to verification of origin, and also with regard to and had to know the responsibility they take upon with the self-certification, where they do not have the guarantee of the third party, and also coordinate both public and private to know what are the failures in this system and also the needs in now for a correct self-certification. They have to be trained and enabled to do this. Also, there's going to be an office email address to clarify any questions before filling out any certification. On the other hand, this is also good for the customs and the authorities of the importing countries. There is a need to strengthen the origin inspection system. Why is this? Because because they refer to specific aspects. They sometimes the customs they pay attention to the formal aspect, but when there is a self-certification in an invoice, they have to report to the system of origin and the profiles of risk that each customs has. And this allows the customs to begin the inspection process of origin where they identify that the risk is high. So the risk of mistakes is also very important to be taken into account. There has to be a change when the country works as an importer. And lastly, it is important, and Aladi is doing this already with regard to the certification of origin, and it is an exercise of simplifying the proof of origin. Demand only the information that they regard as necessary to prove the origin, and they have to uh, put the certificate in the invoice with the same information that in the documents of the operation, which can be obtained by the customs. So when we put this information in the proof of origin, it is much more probable that committing errors.
Of the certification, it's definitely better, not necessarily better than the one. Usually, the strengths of one are the weaknesses of the other. Therefore, what should every country do? They should choose a negotiation for that system that adapts to their own needs, to the needs of the different parties in the agreement, always trying to find some fair balance between the needs of control and preparation in the different customs to be able to verify origin. We want to make sure that the companies are able to self-certify in this sense. There's also the possibility of having self-certification gradually. So initially, we maybe allow to self-certify only specific importers, like economic operators that are already authorized, because we know that they are already still with the same operations of low volumes where risk is not that high. From this operation, there's also the possibility, and this is one thing that we are discussing here in this webinar, this event, especially of reaching a model of a hybrid model where Marcos was a pioneer with this new regime that it approved, and this system allows to choose between self-certification and third-party certification. We also have the example that Rafael will be discussing about the different regimes of agreements that at the end of the year with Singapore that we have these systems of options between one model and the other that will allow companies to be more prepared and that they export maybe the same product, especially the basic ones that use the criteria of origin that is obtained where it's easier to certify. We want to make sure that people can opt for this system, and maybe smaller companies that have a portfolio of products and support can lean in on this type of certification. We have a sentence of what would be the role of these identified entities in a situation of self-certification. We think that we could have the same role of assessors for the exporters, especially for the ones that are affiliated to these different chambers. And we want to also participate supporting the different government stances in the creation of capabilities so that these exporters can self-certify and also maintain the certification services from a third party, since we are talking about a hybrid approach. And we are not going to be finalizing the participation of these entities while they're issuing these origin certificates. And finally, I'd just like to say that currently the certification system of Aladio applies to the agreements that certify origins through certification of third parties, because in Aladio we have a system that was almost like a setup and a server of these different entities that are enabled by every country. We have certified digital certificate that will allow the safety, and this applies digital signatures through symmetric cryptography, which is the technology that we've been using to sign all of the certificates. For the time being, Aladdin, we do not have a possibility of digital certification for self-certification, but in the IT world, anything is possible, and at some point we'll be starting with this. At some point, we'll be thinking about this possibility, okay? Using digital certificate of origin with the signature of the exporter. Let's see what is. We can be thinking globally, maybe in the future. A commercial invoice, maybe that is also digital. And here, see how the implementation of the certification of this is currently we have an event that in their agreements, they're getting some digital certifications that we do not have anything in paper anymore. But we only reserve this for a specific situation. We have countries from Mercosur, between Brazil and Uruguay, have a commercial agreements that we have in Aladdin. This would be from Mercosur. They are certifying digitally. In Mexico and Peru as well, from the 67 agreement. Then we have other agreements that allow you to choose from digital certification or paper hard copy certification. And now for the other countries of Mercosur, Paraguay, Argentina, and Chile, we have AC 35, Chile and Uruguay as Y, Agreement 35 and 73. Brazil, Colombia, and Argentina and Colombia, we do have 72 agreements. Mexico and Uruguay, we have Agreement 60. And in this case, Uruguay allows to choose from, but Mexico does exclusively digitally. And we also have some advancements between Chile and Brazil in the Agreement of 35. We have the following plan would be a pilot plan with real operations of commerce. And finally, we have the issuing This is my presentation. I'm open at the end of the event for some questions or any comments. For the participants and the rest of participants that I wanted to share with, thank you very much. Analia, thank you for your presentation. It was really enriching with all of this data and with all of these concepts that for Brazil, they're so important. And we are getting to know a little bit more about this hybrid approach. And of course, Analia shared in her presentation a theme that was really important for Brazil and for Mercosul as a whole at the end of last year, which was the approval of the new regime of origin in Mercosul. And this new regime of origin has the possibility of the hybrid model for this. And who's going to bring us more information is Rafael Laurentino, General Coordinator of Origin Regimes from the Ministry of Development, Industry, Commerce, and Service, and Thales, Substitute Coordinator also from MD. Both of them will be dealing about this implementation of hybrid model in Brazil. Rafael and Thales, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Aline. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Penny for the invitation to be here today. This is an important thing. This is a very important topic for the Brazilian government. Aline, can you hear me well? Can everyone hear me? Yes, no? Rafael, I believe you are on mute. Can you hear me now? Analia, I can hear him perfectly. Thank you. I just want to confirm that everyone can hear me. I will just confirm. Vednet, can you help us? Rafael, you have Portuguese, right? Yes. Can you repeat? Can you hear me well? No? Rafael, please move forward. Yes, I apologize. Yes, all good now. Great. Let's start fresh. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank for the invitation of CNI, of the National Confederation of Industry here in Brazil. This is an important event about a theme that's so important for the Brazilian government, that theme that technically we've been working at for a long time, which is the self-certification of origin. And parallel, I'd like to congratulate CNI, since Aline is here organizing this event, but also Federico Lamedo. Thank you very much and well done from this event. It's a great pleasure for me to be sharing here this panel, this virtual panel with amazing colleagues. We have Thales here, and they will be sharing the presentation with us. We have Martin, we have ICC with a beautiful presentation at the beginning of the event, and Analia Correa as well. That is it's among the people that understands the most about these agreements in Latin America. To me, it's a pleasure to be here sharing this panel with you all. And the idea here is to share with you some extra information about certification, about how we are thinking about the topic, about how we are seeing this theme. Just like I said, this is the theme that we've been studying for a while now. We've been studying it theoretically, but also practically. And the idea is to share it with all of you and maybe later go into what the government is thinking about in the future to implement self-certification of these agreements that were well mentioned about Analia in her presentation, like the new regime of origin for Mercosul and the recently signed agreement between Mercosul and Singapore. I want to share my PowerPoint presentation. Can everyone see my presentation? And just like I said, I'll be sharing this presentation. I'll be actually, me and Thales will be doing this presentation. He's the general very international in terms of origin inside the Ministry of MDIC. And just like I mentioned before, we have some of the recent agreements of Mercosul and Singapore and the new regime of origin of Mercosul. Before I go into this presentation, I'd like to say that this event is actually quite interesting and important to us as a government to listen a little bit of the perspective, listen the opinions, practical and theoretical, like Martin said from ICC, from Analia Correia that already you've been sharing for some time the same. We've been working together and we've been having nice discussion. Analia mentioned the important work that was done by LADE a few years ago about self-certification. 13 countries of Mercosul participated. Brazil did a presentation, and this was very interesting to be listening to everyone's experience and understand what is their opinion for the Latin American region. It's important for us to have this vision and align our region to the best practices to what we hear around the world in terms of origin. For international trade, we know that the systems change a lot. We have a concept evolving, and this happens fast. And when we consider origin, this is really no different. I want to make some important comments about this theme, but I'd like to call your attention that obviously some topics that we'll be mentioning in our presentation actually are similar to some of the topics that were talked about Martin and Analia in the previous presentation. I want to start my presentation here, and I always like to do this. I cannot see who are the people that are participating here in the event, but from what Aline said and from Frederico, his opening remarks, I understand that we're being represented, people that are here in the event. There are people that deal with international trade in their daily activities. They already work with the theme. They are people that understand a little bit about origin, but always like to give a step back. Because from the beginning, we've been talking about certification of origin, self-certification, but what is that? What's the point of all of this? And I like to go back and maybe to get this alignment with everyone. So from the beginning, we've been talking about elements that compose a proof of origin of merchandise in international trade of products. And what's the objective of having proof of origin? Actually, and deep down, this proof of origin help us to know what is the treatment that should be given to that in the importing country. What customs we need to do? Should I give a preference because I have international trade agreement? Am I going to separate the origin because I have an element like establishment of quota for importing of that product in my country? So proof of origin is a document, an information that will help fundamentally the importing country on knowing how to deal with that product. And we know we have proof of origins on one side, preferential proof of origins that we've been talking since the beginning of the event today. We've been focusing, and really this is the point, focusing on the preferential origin, and pretty much it's a proof of origin that is focused on preferential agreement of commerce on autonomous like general systems of commerce trade preference that countries of more evolved economy can work with. So proof of origin basically is a document, is an piece of information that will establish what treatment will be given to that product when it's important. And the legal framework, so where is the information about this? And dealing with origin and proof of origin being one of these items, we will see information in the commercial trade agreements and the regulation of these agreements. We'll have some information. Every single one of them will have their own model of proof of origin, how these should be filled out, how should it be presented, what rules should follow, what are some of the information that need to have. So in preferential side, this regulation will have here, and even internal regulation and autonomous instruments, just like I mentioned in the SGP. On the other side, proof of origin that's non-preferential is that proof of origin that's used for any commerce, not considering anything preferential. So let's say I have a quota. I need to discriminate the origin of this product because I have a defined quota to deal with this. Another example that's interesting that several countries around the world work with it, and Brazil is one of them. We have a tool of risk management, and we apply this in our legislation, the investigation of non-preferential proof of origin, because of measures of commercial defense. If I have something specific applied to a specific country, I need to discriminate what is the origin of that imported good, just to understand that where is it coming from, what is the country of origin, to see if we have something, to make sure if there's no anti-dumping effect happening. So this will be inside the national legislation. And I bring your attention to a thing. Every country today established their norm in a specific way. I can share an example of Brazil, non-preferential. Up a few years ago, Brazil just had a form, a simple declaration that is important with the information of that were given by the producer that's exporting. It would present that to the Brazilian government, a declaration of origin. And today, this is not necessary anymore. Today in Brazil, we don't require any type of proof of origin for importation that we call that are non-preferential. But again, I understand the objective here of this webinar is and my colleague Analia Correa really shared this information, a lot of depth about this theme. And I'm going to please call the attention and bring some highlights about some of the aspects connected to proof of origin. And again, getting some theoretical concepts. We know there are some opinions that are divergent about some specific themes. We have certification of proof of origin. It's one of these themes. We have different points of view that are shared, but we have also some divergencies of perspective on the theme. And now, in terms of classification of proof of origin, we have some lines that determine some routes for this. One of them that you can see, maybe Analia Correa type. Analia Correa already talked about this in depth. Proof of origin can be a certificate of origin. It's a document that is presented to aduana that proves the origin of that, or maybe just a declaration of origin that is done by the commercial operator directly. And this again has the same idea of determining the origin of products. And we have who is issuing this proof of origin. We have several agreements throughout the world, some proof of origins being issued by the respective authorities. And this is why we have Brazilian agreements, the current agreements that Brazil is part in. They adopt this, they utilize this model. The issuer of the proof of origin is an authority, is the Brazilian government. And this is specified in the agreement. But the agreement also opens the possibility that the Brazilian government delegates, we say Brazilian, but whichever country participates here, we want to delegate to a different association that can be private or public with different rules that are determined in that country. In Brazil, we have 48 entities that are here to deal with this, and they deal with the different agreements that Brazil is part of. So about the importer. And inside of this concept of certification of origin, we see some other things. We study these agreements around the world. We see some differences here in self-certification. Up until today, we have agreements that allow self-certification that is done by an authorized exporter, which means that country allows a specific commercial operator to certify the origin of their product in this instrument of trade. And here in the example, then just connecting with the presentation of Martin, Brazil today is beneficiary of the FDP of Swiss and Norway, and we utilize this. It was mentioned by Mark in his presentation. They have some preferences that are part of the general system of FDP. And in this case, we do only that specific producer that has a specific number that is able to use this auto certification and be benefited in the importing country. And again, we already see this in other countries around the world, self-certification done by the producer, exporter. And this is a case that it's very clear in the sense of perception. Even the producer itself, they will be declaring the origin of that product, and they will deal with the commitments that are connected to that declaration. And lastly, this done by the exporter. We already talked a lot about this by Analia Correio and Martin. We have agreements of the United States, and they established this modality of self-certification. So I'm going to go into a topic now that I particularly think it's interesting to explore, which is advantages and disadvantages. And once more, Analia had a brilliant presentation of advantages and disadvantages about self-certification, but I want to explore a few other elements that we see as being important. So if we talk about the certification of origin by competent authority or delegation, same model, this is directly being sent by the government, we see in this model some advantages and disadvantages. The first thing I want to call attention is intervention of third parties. And then you can ask me, okay, but intervention of third parties is advantage or disadvantage? Will depend on the point of view that we want to analyze. We have the demonstrated structure of that agreement. I have the intervention of third parties here, but if I can have the guarantee of the truthfulness of the quality of the information that I'm putting in that document that's being received by the customs of the country, that is important. This is a relative guarantee because it will truly depend on the nature of the entity that's dealing with that certification. It will depend on the relationship between entity and the commercial operated. And this is very important that this relationship is a relationship. It's really a commercial relationship. Most entities, they are requiring here. And we are dealing with this clients. We are dealing with this. They are issuing those certificates. They're helping with the structure. We have the analysis of proof of that product, but there is a relationship between client and the entity that is issuing that certificate and the commercial operator that is issuing that. So in theory, there is a guarantee of truthfulness of the information and quality of the information in that document when we do have the intervention of a third party. We have a second stage, a second step to check, so to speak, so at least in theory. Something else that I think is very, very important here when we study the Brazilian reality is the shared responsibility. When I have a document being issued by a third party, the commercial operator, the producer, exporter, they need to really give all of the information to the entity that's going to be issuing that certificate of origin. The moment that they present all of the information, that entity does all of the necessary analysis and certifies that that product really is following the rules of the agreement. The responsibility for that information, the liability is shared between importer, exporter, and the entity that put their seal of approval, so to speak. This is an important theme that I'm going to just self-certification, but now self-certification about stuff from delegation, and we understand that we have a shared responsibility. On the other hand, and again, this is a disadvantage, it actually takes more time and it's less dynamic. If I'm talking about self-certification, I'm talking about a commercial operator that understands their own product and they're going to self-declare the origin of that product and present this information to their importer, to the country that is importing that product in a way that's more dynamic, in a way that's faster. And of course, it's not going to cost that much because it's not going to have the cost of service, time. They're going to have logistics involved. So here, my friends, I'd like to just quickly add an information and a link for the information of Analia Correia, which is connected to the methodology that was developed and the systems that were developed by Aladi a few years ago, which is, many of you know, CODI, which is Certification of Digital Origin. This is a very interesting tool for our region. It's very important. And this will help us with this last part of disadvantages that I'm showing you here on screen, which is the cost of service and logistics. In COD, we are going to have a digital document. We do not have a physical change. It can be changed between the international commerce parties, and this is a document that brings elements that bring safety, really. This is something that I'll be discussing further. The idea of all of the documents that come from customs and with COGIT. If we compare with manual certificate of origin or something that's not digital, so to speak, we can observe that COGIT brings several benefits. And Brazil is already utilizing from these benefits. And Analia said that Brazil's been using this for a few years. Brazil actually has been implemented digital certificate of origin with Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia, in 100% of their operations of preferential commerce. All of these operations with these three partners, we have the base of certificate of that's digital and not only hard copy. Now, talking about self-certification, we see this is the opposite of what we've been seeing with the they go there and they certify their own product. We clearly see a reduction of costs. So we do not have external factors to issue that document. We do not have additional costs when we want to issue that document. Of course, less bureaucracy because we do not have that second step in commercial operator. We know, because everyone here that deals with international trade, we know how hard it is, how many things we need to know. We need to understand how many systems do we need to access. So one last step, it really diminishes the bureaucracy and an important element that makes it easier for commerce.
And also, this is directly linked to the other bias of the importing country that receives the proof of origin. So this country that self-certified the good, it must prove what is writing down. It's not only having the security that the product has origin that fulfills the agreement rules. It has to have the security and also the capacity of proving this. So in inspection and control of the importing country, the country has to prove it. This is an important aspect. And also here, already talking about the self-certification, we've been studying this in Brazil for quite a while. We've had very good experiences in negotiation, of course, both with Latin American country under the umbrella of Aladi, but also the other partners that was mentioned in other presentations. In the Mercosur, we have negotiating with Latin America, European Union, Singapore, Korea, Canada, And the Mercosur have been negotiating with these countries, and obviously there is an exchange of information, exchange of experience, which is very interesting and important so that we can analyze our reality, especially with respect to self-certification material. And within the study, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that is interesting to talk about this topic. It is a guideline that was published by TAUMA a few years ago. It was published in 2018. We are currently in 2024. We'll have at least 6 years since the publication of these guidelines. And as you can see, 6 years ago, we already have interesting aspects that was pointed out by AUMA guideline. And also, I'd like to highlight that this guideline, indeed, in the text itself, it's informed that it is based directly on the guidelines of the Kyoto Convention. So I draw your attention to item 4, which is in this guideline of AUMA, and I'll read it to you. And also I'd like to call your attention to what I highlighted in yellow. Item 4 promotes the use of the self-certification of origin, and it comes with a justification. Take into account the growing volume of the preferred trade, and here I point out the growing volume of this trade. We have more and more agreements, important agreements throughout the world. It is important for the integration and society, and acknowledging the need of facilitating the procedures with respect to the certification of origin. That is got to do with facilitating the trade and procedures. So this is what is mentioned. So here it is clear that this information starts from the international entity that contemplates the customs throughout the world, and where there is an incentive for the self-certification. Now, we're not here talking about if it's an exclusive or hybrid model, but it is clear that a few years ago, the AUMA, with respect to the customs, have put this on the table, the importance that you incentivize the self-certification. I draw your attention to the last part. So acknowledging the specificities of the domestic environment. Obviously, AUMA incentivizes the implementation of the self-certification. And on the other hand, with all the precaution, AUMA then recommends that the countries acknowledge and also take care of the specificities of their domestic asset, which is indeed in line with what we have been working with in Brazil lately. Also, I'd like to point out an important aspect which links directly with our topic, with the historic evolution of the certification and proof of origin. Martin, in his presentation, he made very interesting comments. He said that until 2015, European Union negotiated hybrid agreements with respect to the certification of origin. And after 2015, it started using self-certification. So we find this throughout many countries in the world, mainly in big economies. It is interesting to evolve this historic evolution and all the topics with respect to international trade. And things evolve, and theory evolve as well. With respect to the proof of origin, it's not different. So there is a historic evolution. So if we consider the first agreement, we had a certification of origin which was done by the government. There was a documented focus where the customs were worried about if they were well fulfilled. And this then went on, but it doesn't mean that one model died for another one to start. They coincide and work parallel in several parts of the world today. But today we notice that in time there were agreements that arose with the proof of origin. So it's a self-certification only for a few operation traders. And we notice it is a controlled environment because the government states that only these ones can be self-certified. So there is a controlled environment. And in the years, we start then seeing agreement with a proof of origin issued by the importer and exporter. And here we see a change in paradigm with respect to the issuance of documents with the focus on risk management. So the customs now are worried in developing a system in line with what the world customs authorities have been doing, which has got to do with a strong work with respect to the risk and also rules of origin. Now, in this timeline, what we see is that we have the proof of origin that was issued directly by the importer. My colleagues already mentioned this with regard to the need of knowledge for those who are importing, and this only happens when there are companies of the same group or related companies. We see the American agreements in this line, and besides the focus on the risk management is having huge trust in the system. This being said, I'd like to highlight one aspect in this timeline that refers to the document that existed in the past, the focus of the document that existed in the past. Of course, countries are really concerned with the documents. They want to know if the documents are very well filled out. But with the dynamics of the international trade today, this becomes quite unfeasible. We have several agreements, and more we have trade flows throughout the world, and this migrates to the focus on risk. So customs now doesn't look to the document operation per operation, but has a focus, the risk management, when they point out specific problems in that trade operation. So I'd like to highlight this, which is very interesting indeed and important, because we have been working in line with the federal revenue in Brazil, and the Brazilian customs is very in line with what has been developed now with regard to the risk management. Here, I briefly brought a graph. It is not an updated one. It is already from a few years ago. It's public, but this shows the agreement throughout the world. And we see that 67% of the main agreements throughout the world, they already present the possibility of self-certification. So be it a hybrid, exclusive model, or even the self-certification by the authorized entity or directly by the importer, exporter, or producer. So this is very important piece of information. It must have been updated, but it should be updated, but we still do not have a publication with this data. We know that, as you can see, 32% of the agreements are in fact issued by the authority. 7% allows the importer to declare the origin of product. We see it's a small figure. So if we see into this 7%, 98.5% will be agreements in the United States of America. This is that piece of data that we have been studying, mainly the first one, where it said that 67% of the current agreement throughout the world already have some sort of self-certification. So now, looking into the agreements throughout the world, as mentioned, Brazil, Mercosur have been negotiation with partners and big economies throughout the world. And this is very clear with respect to the negotiation as we follow on the agreements that are published in these countries with other partners. It is very clear that these countries, they migrated to self-certification and not the use of certification of origin. Obviously, each one has their reasons for doing so. And also in this line, so while they negotiate with Brazil and Mercosur, they bring this self-certification model, and many of these countries demand that the Mercosur adopt the self-certification method or accept the negotiation, or they can come to accept a model of proof of origin. Now, before passing the floor to my colleague Thales, who's going to talk more specifically about the new certificate of origin here in Brazil, I'd like to highlight that we have been talking a lot about the advantage and disadvantage of the other systems. I agree with my colleagues here that say that seeing advantages and disadvantages will, let's say, will depend very much on the nature of the company, on the nature and the maturity of the system of proof of origin of that country. And depending on this, we can see more or less advantages depending on what is being done. I'd like to also say that in the case of Brazil, we, in terms of international trade, we have been aligning more and more to the best practices that are being adopted in the world in all the systems to facilitate trade, operational practices, procedures. We have been seeking to align the legislation and the legislation for better practices. And the topic of self-certification, this is a pathway that Brazil wants or intends to advance. And once again, I can draw your attention to that end part of my guidelines of the OMA. So it's a World Customs Organization. Acknowledging the specificity of the domestic environment. So by understanding our business environment, we have adopted the agreements that we have adopted in our negotiations, and we have sought to use a hybrid system of proof of origin where the operational or the trade operation member should share the responsibility. If they need help, they will issue a certificate of origin in case they have the ability to do so. They have the legal responsibility and is aware of the exclusive legal responsibility and proof of product. They will be able to adopt the self-certification. So this hybrid model today, I'm talking about today in Brazil, we understand that it is a more interesting model so that we can mature and go into this topic within the trade operators in Brazil. I brought a few examples. There are many countries or many companies, big companies that will prefer to be certified. I have a different point of view because besides sharing this among big and small companies, depending on the nature of the product that is exported, the nature of the business, we think about the simple and agricultural product. In the first chapter of this product, the information given by the trade operators to issue the certificate of origin. For example, if I produce and export fruits, there isn't a difficulty in analyzing the origin of that product. Obviously, they have to understand the rules, regulation, legislation, and they can obviously obtain the information in the first export operation. But in the next one, the next exports, you already have this information now. Before passing the floor to Thales, just an interesting comment that was mentioned by Analia regarding the reality of the current entities. We know it's a trade movement that impacts several aspects, even those that are authorized to issue the certificate. I always mention that in Brazil, mainly in Brazil, of the 48 entities that are approved, we understand that they work in a very relevant manner for the international trade. It goes much beyond the issuance of the certification of origin. We had a seminar at the ministry that talked about the importance of the role of these entities, which is to be there. It's a consulting that they do to give support and help in the export of products of Brazilian exporters, how they can make use of the bold agreements that Brazil has throughout the world with different partners. We have this role since of today, and it's going to happen irrespective of the model of proof of origin, be it certification, be it self-certification, or hybrid system. Depending on the model, the entities will continue happening, and each one will obviously define the format, but it is the goal is to support and work with these operators throughout the world. So I think a last comment, which is of extreme relevance, which is a message I always put forth, irrespective of the analysis that you do with respect to the best advantages, disadvantages of these models, we should never lose sight of the essence of a trade agreement. So why do countries sit and negotiate agreement, but not just for integrate their productive chains to open markets, export, import more with more competitive prices and benefit society to stimulate the industry, domestic industry. So we should never lose sight that these are the end goals. I say this in comparison to the timeline I mentioned, because in the past there was this concern of with respect to the formal aspect of the certification of origin, if the form is well filled out, if the information that's right or not. Will I unqualified this based on information that's wrong? Well, I think that this is an understanding that we share here, technically speaking, in Brazil. It is a point of view that is quite mistaken, because we cannot lose sight the essence and the main agreements that are done. The certification of origin, proof of origin, cannot be an element that hinders the intensity of this trade flow. And we see this happening with the certification of origin issued in paper, for example, and the advance that you had with the amazing system that was developed by CADE, which has the objective of reducing this formality of the document and the paper itself. So if I have any problems, identify any problem with respect to risk management, I will actually attack that specific problem. I'm going to pass the floor to my colleague Thales, and I thank you very much once again for this event. I'm very honored to having been participated with respect to these authorities worldwide. And I pass the floor to my friend Thales to follow with the presentations. Thank you very much for your attention. Good morning to everyone. It's an enormous pleasure to be here. So I will start off from now. This is my first assumption. Now, there was great choices. I compliment Cieni, Aline, Rafael, and you all know them very well. Analia, Martin, I thank you very much for the invitation of being part of this team. And the second aspect that I think is important to introduce is that we really enjoyed participating in the CNE event, because we understand that CNE is got to do with real life. The origin, for those who wake up early, for those who work, generate income and work, I think the role isn't other that we don't forget the merit to promote the trade flow and the trade agreement. We are very much aligned with CNE, and that's why we love to participate in the event that are promoted by the entity. And I'd like to share with you and make a parallel with the Mercosul events. So we know that CNE is a priority. Indeed, it generates income, but indeed, we love to participate. So I made a comment in another meeting that your events are very, very relevant. And here, I would like to leave a level of MDIC. If MDIC presentations. If you leave this MDIC presentation without generating more business, so origin is real life. This is real life, and we'd like you to learn to use the origin to generate money. So in this sense, I'd like to make a few comments, operational comments, which I regard important, because I thank Rafael, who let me do this, the more pleasant part of this presentation, which is real life and practice. So I'm going to make a few comments with respect to the reason of the historic movements that we've had. Firstly, the hybrid model offers possibilities. For example, which one to choose? The European Union seems to be such a way forward bloc, and they promoter of this. So why do they allow more hybrid model? Why do they battle against this? The reason is that they had pains that we have not had, and because we have not implemented self-certification. But what were the pain points they had? They had a number of legal defeats, as Martin mentioned, because when they investigated the imported presented a certification of origin provided by the exporting company or even from the government. But what was the argument with respect to the European legal system? How can I, as important, imagine that this certificate does not respond to an original product? How can you, uh, blame me for this? I can naturally not be penalized, and this legal argument prospered in the European Union, and it was deemed valid. So then the entities said that this is important for you to understand the differences or the changes throughout time. They said, unfortunately, we will not be offering this option to our importers, although it is a measure that facilitates it because we are losing collection. So this is important to see how the topic evolves into practice. And the second aspect regarding self-certification throughout the world, as mentioned, it's got to do with risk management. When we have the certificate of origin, I put or I give to the other or convert to the other. For example, Brazil will export orange juice. We are the biggest exporter of orange juice. This is a real example. Brazil will export orange juice to Argentina. Maybe this juice comes from China, Chile, Ecuador, or from Malaysia. The Argentinian government can, through risk management, define parameters to understand, for example, to investigate. They do not trust on Tales. This is not a Brazilian orange juice, but because of the frailness, just for you to understand, because of the frailness of the risk management system. An example of this, for example, today, the percentage of operations in Brazil that are not a green channel represent around 5% of the maximum of all our operations. So the best practices indicate 2% because the indicator must work with risk management. So since in the past we had problems to define the risk, what did we do? The Argentinian government want to investigate Thales' company that export orange juice, but they're not prepared for that. In the 70s and the 80s, when I will transfer to the other party the co-responsibility to investigate this. MDIC, Ministry of Industry, confirm or issue a certificate that this product is Brazilian, and on doing so, you are helping me. So there is a double check for both those export and others that don't. And also, apart from being a coordinator of the certificate of origin, this is a very, very strong and convenient argument. What do developing countries with respect to risk management, like the Canadians, Americans, and European countries? Doesn't matter. I don't need your control for this because I will control what I have to control. I am efficient in this aspect. The European authority has a center that fights fraud called OLAF. This entity is composed of over 400 analysts, auditors that battle or they work fighting fraud. So there's no problem, Brazil. If you are not certified, I will control it. You can self-certify yourself. So it's important for you to understand this dynamic of the double inspection and the self um, declaration as risk management. And this is the case for the importer. Martin said something that is indeed very interesting: responsibility, accountability. The sentence is the responsibility falls upon the importer. Well, why? I'm trying to bring you what was said in a practical manner. Why did this evolve? And why did we change? Because at the end of the present, it's important for you to understand how you earn money and how you lose money so that you don't do the same in terms of losing money. So how do Americans say the importer, you can self-certify yourself because at the end of the day, who's going to pay the bill is the importer. If there's a problem in origin, the importer will pay for that. So if you pay, so why not offer the possibility of you declaring your origin? Well, then you might say, well, I'm not sure because, but at the end of the day, you are going to pay this. This is an option. It's not mandatory. The importer must not declare the origin unless you feel comfortable for them. So the importer then arises as the honor, as the one that will generate the issues. So this is why I believe that in this new hybrid model, the role of the entity, as mentioned in the seminar that Rafael presented, it's going to be the role of the company. So it can be part of the trade agreement. So where you have more security. Well, then you can say, well, I trust you, Thales, because you're saying your juice is Brazilian, but to reduce my risk, because at the end of the day, this is my responsibility. For example, the importer in Argentina can say, I want you to issue your double checking interests me. It's like a car insurance to reduce the risk of the loss. So it will be the same dynamic as the hybrid model. You go to the entity and issue it because it's going to hold me for this. So, but already sell you for the past 15 years. Well, you don't need it anymore because you can self-declare yourself. We have the certification and we know the origin of your product. So you reduce the cost. So this is what we understand that will bring as consequence the self-certification. In this sense, I'd like to point out two more elements before concluding the presentation, 2 slides. The first point here is that the more agri-industrial is the economy, the easier is it to implement the certification of origin, according to what was said by Rafael. Maybe in Europe, the presence of these entities are much more present of the hybrid model because they can cover the rule of value. But if you're exporting coffee, cocoa, chocolate, milk, orange, let's say, and we know the risk is much lower, which favors this. But lastly, a lot was talked about reducing mistakes. So what happens? Today, origin is real life. It's money, right? If you produce milk, your cows are Brazilian cows, and you extract milk from them, and you bottle and export this milk, so your importer will have to pay taxes as observed as it may be. This dynamic is being changed. We have been battling with the Brazilian government, although it isn't observed that, when to convince the countries that this doesn't make sense. Milk is from Brazil. So in the sense, the self-certification here, it lives with this new dynamic. So if the formalism is relevant, if the origin criteria is relevant, well, the self-certification is harmful because there will be mistakes. But if the formalism is irrelevant, I might get the certification wrong. You can get it wrong, but you can replace it by the proof of origin with the intrinsic reduction in bureaucracy and self-certification. So can you guarantee that your product is has a proof of origin? Maybe you got a wrong word, or and so on. If you can prove it, no problem. So the proof of origin cannot be replaced. But this being said, we now will talk about the Mercosur model, where there's going to be a coexistence with this model, hybrid model. To implement the self-certification, it's important that you know that we have to notify 6 months prior. We have to communicate the partners that we are going to offer this benefit to our operators. So Rome was penalized in Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. Now, in this week, on Monday, the project has arrived in Brazil, and we estimate that in a short period of time, still this semester, we will have a new regime. Our idea is that in the first meeting, we want to self-declare ourselves. We want to offer this option to our operators here for Brazil. And then internationalization. There is a clause, an article about the beginning of this. So fulfilling what is said in the ROM, we will communicate to our partners the intention of our self-certification. If you can pass on to the last slide. So this is the second last one. It's about the Mercosur. We talked about the dual system. It's a gradual implementation as well, as you can see. And also we have not yet defined if all the interested exporters, and being absolutely clear in this is our idea initially, or for a limited group, to assure the trustworthiness. And also for this, we're going to have very clear channels that can be identifiable and open to the companies in case they have any questions regarding these aspects. And also foreseeability, because which has got to do with this information given to the market and the partner, that in 6 months there is the need to establish this deadline so that we can effectively begin this implementation. Last slide, please. So here you can see the other negotiations that are ongoing. What is the status of this discussion with respect to the self-certification of origin? Because once again, this impacts your routine, cost reduction, exports, imports, and Chile, for example, we have an ongoing negotiation with respect to the update of the regimen of origin. We have already presented to them the hybrid model origin. It's going to be similar, not identical one. We will have to discuss maybe 6 months or a larger period of time for the self-certification. We are probably going to implement the self-certification hybrid model with Singapore. This agreement was signed in 2023 in the last summit that we have in the Mercosur. So you have access to this structure. It's already public. With EFTA, for example, we managed we have already highlighted the importance of the coexistence of the hybrid model. And with the European Union, because of the answer is no, because of the pain points they face with other partners. In case the agreement is signed, we'll only have the self-declaration of origin with a period of adaptation, like 5+2. With this, after this deadline, we can issue the certificate after this period, the self-declaration of origin. Okay, I pass the floor to Rafael. Thank you very much for your attention. It's a pleasure to be here. Congratulations for your event, and I'm at your disposal for any questions you may have. Thank you very much, Rafael and Thales. It is always a pleasure to hear you. This was very good. You are very good professionals, experts. This presentation went much beyond my expectations. So your presentation was very, very supplementary. We have very little time, but I'd like to use the 10 minutes of our seminar to talk about a question. I wrote down several points which I'd like to ask you at the end, but you answered all the questions that I had. You covered a lot about the topic, and you were very complete in this respect. But I'd like to talk about a topic that can be talked about here with all of you. I'd like to begin with Martin, for example, asking him how must a country work its risk management? How can they implement and take care of risk management so that self-certification can be implemented without a lot of loss? Martin, you have the floor. I believe Martin had problems with the connection. Analia.
Yeah. Sorry.
Martin, are you back?
I just missed that last part. Sorry. Can you repeat what the question?
I would like to know your opinion about how a country can implement a good risk management to avoid negative impacts regarding the implementation of self-certification.
Depending on, it starts, in my opinion, on the export side. It starts, in my opinion, on the export side. When it was all approved exporter status in the European Union before 2015, in my opinion, it was a relative good system, because customs in the European Union, they were going to the exporter, and they really did a check. What is your knowledge about rules of origin? How often are you exporting? What is the type of product? They were investigating if all the paper documents were there, if they had proof of raw materials, things like that. And after a proper check, that company was getting an approved exporter status. So in my opinion, it also begins at the exporting country. And that's the issue that I have a little bit with the REC system, because there's not really a check. What also is happening then, normally with the approved exporter status, also in the exporting country, after 2 or 3 years, customs is going back if everything is in good order. On the risk management on the importing country, I did not touch base on electronic certificates of origin, because if it's a certificate of origin, in my opinion, in 2024, it always needs to be a digital solution for a certificate of origin. I've seen already projects, for example, in the Middle East, where they implemented artificial intelligence to do more cross checks within the importing country. With the new techniques that you're having, it's all about if the origin is true and correct. So I believe it has to be an electronic certificate of origin or an electronic message or whatever you call it, issued by an authority or self-certification. Self-certification is fine. And you really, with artificial intelligence on the importing country, you can do checks. For example, if you are getting in pineapples with origin in the Netherlands, you're sure that's not correct. And for a lot of products, you can do something with the new elements and new techniques. On the issuing side, for example, as the Netherlands Chamber, we are using a system for non-preferential origin as automatic approval. And that also has to do with checks on front and in afterwards.
Thank you very much for bringing your point of view about this topic. I'd like to pass the floor to Analia. In your case, I'd like to hear you, how you have seen this risk management in the Latin American country that has self-certification, the importance for the implementation in this model.
Experience in Latin America and the Union of Certification with these countries of Latin America still is not that developed, but yes, many of the countries of Latin America, they remember this is the region that has most amount of trade agreements. They have many things that have signed their agreements with the United States that were the first agreement. We have interregional ones. And if we think at first, we think Latin America still, we're a little bit behind building that trust, you know, because importers here, we have the certification, the self-certification with the agreements that we signed with the United States. And we think about these importers, they could certify potentially. We don't have maybe a third party, an entity that would guarantee the checking process of the ORIG declaration so that we don't have any mistakes for that information. So Latin America still has that deficit of trust building. And this is why maybe at first stage, we're thinking about the certification on the side of the importer, we are not going to have so much adherence, and we need to be working with this. We need to work building this trust. We need to work together to prepare the exporters and bring awareness for them of whoever is using self-certification. We need to maintain that channel to give them support if they have any questions. we want to make sure that this is necessary to reinforce customs and bring all of these aspects of origin. What are some of the risk profiles, and adequately work with them so that we can do all of the checking, origin checking process, and having a multidisciplinary team that could check in these cases. Also, it's very important to highlight that in Mercosul, Brazil will be an integral part, and we want to move forward with this model where for whoever does not have the experience in Latin America, and we want to see how this is going to work. What is the level that we're going to have? Where are some of the levels that we're going to restart? Because this is atypical of how many exporters, whenever they choose this specific model, we want to make sure that if they opt for self-certification, they need to have the support of the entities of government to measure how this is, how the business environment is working. With all of these experiences, in terms of support of ALAD, we have 50 preferential agreements, and only the agreement of Chile and Mexico, of the different policies of Mexico, they are self-certified. And through my experience, this is not that high. I want to take advantage of this opportunity, if you allow me, of focusing on a different theme, a different origin aspect. We have the regional secretary of ALAD. We receive a lot of questions from the private sector. So we are kind of like a thermometer of the needs of exporters and importers. We've been receiving lately many consultations through focusing on many different agreements, and they're concentrating in those different dispositions of proof of origin, which is the main topic for this webinar. So the proof of this direct review that it's being followed, we didn't want to lose this opportunity to complement here that the regional secretary is working in a study and seeing some different dispositions about these topics in every agreement from these ALAD countries and other Latin American countries. And we are seeing what are some of the different parameters, what are some of the weak points that still are not clear in these different dispositions, and that we are losing some opportunity in preferential commerce, like it was said. Maybe we're not focusing on the proof of origin and direct verification. So this is a thing for a different event in the same nature for the future. Thank you very much. Thank you, Analia. We always are looking forward for ALAD's research. Definitely, you help a lot our Latin American countries. And lastly, I would like to direct my question for Thales and Rafael, more connected with the sense of what is your point of view in risk management that we have today in Brazil, if it's going to be necessary to adapt anything or maybe evolve, or what should we be doing to implement self-certification? Thank you. I want to just make a comment, and then Thales, maybe you can add something else. How do we see this theme of risk management in the model of self-certification and hybrid model that we've been working in this new regime of origin of Mercosul? I think first of all is the structure, Aline, that it's maybe a little bit bigger than only the risk management and customs point of view. This goes from the agreement, and the normative instrument. On one side, this is at least is our technical understanding. This is an understanding that we've been working with these agreements. On one side, we established this option, this commercial option of self-certification, but on the other hand, we are establishing the same regulation, an instrument of control and verification with tools that are more efficient, that they are more agile, that they are faster, so that customs can work with them. So it comes from the negotiation. These are parallel pathways that are running together. I give this option of self-certification, but also customs have to put to themselves the easiness of accessing information, the practicality of accessing information, that maybe it's necessary to give each a certain preference. And now thinking about risk management for customs, of course, we are going to make a comment with Brazilian government. We are not representatives of Brazilian customs, but what we have today and what we are working actually together in negotiations with them is that federal is actually in Brazil is very much aligned with the main principles established by the OMA, the World Organization of Customs. This is something that has been working from then for a long time. This risk management is not a focus on the origin. We are talking about every element, every aspect that could cause maybe some sort of issues for economies or maybe avoidance of payment or anything like that. And Receita Federal, Customs in Brazil, already been working for many years with the best practices of risk management. And I want to repeat, information from them for us during these negotiations. Receita Federal today is already ready to receive, for example, self-declaration in the systematic of risk management. This is an information from Brazil's Customs, and this is the comment that I wanted to make in regards to this question. So I want to give this for Thales, and I think it's going to be a very interesting theme. And I know him, but I think he's going to be talking about risk management that we do here, our team inside of MDIC for these non-preferential operations, right? Yeah, I think this is such a wonderful question. Well done. We have $1 million questions. This is definitely the $1 billion question. I actually give courses in Africa to help them deal with this type of fraud. So risk management is a key aspect, and it's a key aspect because it presumes non-trustworthiness, so to speak. Okay, so when the European Union says that they want a self-declaration of origin, implicitly they're saying it doesn't matter if there's fraud or not. I'm going to catch it. If you bother me, I will have the tools that will allow me to act like this. So in this sense, risk management is core, is a fundamental element of commercial intelligence of a government. And therefore, I'm sure, and we can have a different discussion about this, but it would be wonderful. The course that I was talking about is it's a 2-week course for you to see how complex is this risk management. And we know the government, we're not going to open this to different companies because it really interferes with our ability to collect taxes. So just to answer you clearly, I want to show you some tools that government use. There is actually an article that was published by the IMF. If I could share maybe with our audience in comments in YouTube, I'm going to put this. I'm going to send you through the chat, okay, Aline? It is Library of IMF. This is a free publication. It's amazing on how, I just put this on the chat box, okay? How this mirror evaluation could help fight fraud, not only in origin, which is the main point, like Rafael said, but another possibility is collaboration between customs, between the different governments. So to define risk, I remember one specific case involving Bulgaria and European Union with sugar. And I want to open a little bit, it's a core for us, a little bit about our risk management that applies to any risk management, even customs, okay? So we are here, we're just wrapping up an investigation against Cambodia, non-preferential of a company that had been already investigated by the European Union. So we monitor origin investigations around the world. We collect this data. We put this in our algorithms of control of Brazilian imports to filter companies that are already being investigated. This is a real example of risk management. Another real example, just to explain to you what I mean, with Israel. the self-certification for small values like $1,000. So one element here is to monitor of a specific producer under $1,000. So Tali is exporting to Israel, Aline Israel. So we start like $900, $800. It's the same product, the same client, the same producer, but values under that threshold so that they don't have to present this certificate of origin. So there are several mechanisms that government are being using for this risk management. And like Rafael said, we are not employees of Receita Federal. We do not know their risk management. We can only talk about ours that are being applied in MDIC for non-preferential relationships. But what we know is, first, they are completely comfortable with accepting origin declarations because they understand that we already have a lot of know-how. And this is validated by some positions, fiscal positions in customs around the world. So one of the vice president of the World Organization of Customs is Brazilian. Several employees of Customs Brazil that work at FAC, Fiscal Federal Department of IMF. So the ability of customs management in Brazil, it's really noteworthy and is recognized internationally, so much so that Brazilians, not us, but auditors from Receita, they have positions of power in this international agency. So we show that we are ready, we are available to receive in our imports these declarations of origin that we have come in. And again, great question, Aline, wonderful. $1 billion question for sure. Okay, so only great news that we had here today, huh? So I think we definitely, there's a lot to talk about still on this theme. And for Brazil, for our Brazilian companies, this is new, but around the world, this has been happening for a while now. And it was great to be able to bring back this, everyone's knowledge here so that our Brazilian companies are able to hear about self-certification, hybrid model, and they already recognize the theme, right? So when it's great that they are be able to take advantage of all benefits of every single model, because this is what every single one of us wants, right? In this room, we want our companies to grow, we want them to develop, and we are ready to support them. I would like to thank you so much. Thank our speakers. You always are very much available to support us. You're very proactive. You are supporting us every single day in the government, different discussions, international agencies. Thank you so much for your work. I'd like to thank to the participants as well. I hope this was fruitful for you. We did this webinar and we put a lot of thought into it. I'd like to thank all of my colleagues of National Confederation of Industry that care for the structure of the event, that supported me in this organization. And lastly, we will definitely keep this dialogue open. We'll be promoting more events. We'll be talking about more this theme, and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much for everyone's participation, and see you next time.